Well, good afternoon, everybody, and hope everyone's doing well in this time of social distancing as we work through this pandemic. So, again, glad to be here with you. My name is Abel Vega, and I'm serve as Director of Mission Service and Justice for the Rio Texas Conference of the United Methodist Church. And so we office out of San Antonio, and of course, many of you have been down to the border through Courts and Ports, and Cindy was mentioned, as who has served as one of the receivers of folk going down there. And so what I'm going to do is really some of this. I'm not sure how many on this call were perhaps at the advocacy days back in February. So at that time I did a workshop or a presentation entitled Courts and Ports and Beyond, Building a Foundation for Migration Justice. And so part of this is that information shared at that time, but also just kind of, I was doing some updating yesterday and just kind of reflecting on this, which was kind of interesting because when Erica asked me to make that presentation, I was given this title, and so it's kind of interesting when you get titles, how something can be stated as such and you start to live into it. So I really do believe I like the title because what does it mean to really build a foundation for migration justice? So in that, then let me see. So as I was just looking for information yesterday, and I came across and you'll get these slides. So Erica will actually can provide you with the link to download these slides. You'll have these. I tend to kind of cite websites and things like that so that you can actually go look at this information. So I just want to offer to you this in terms of migrant justice. This is actually an organization called Migrant Justice, Justicia Migrante, that is in Vermont. And as you get into this particular place where it says silenced voices, it actually what propelled this organization to come into being was after an accident. This Jose Obeth Santis Cruz was killed, because he was working on a dairy farm, and the machinery got a hold of his clothes, and he was strangled to death. And so the video, it's about a 25-minute video that I commend to you that really tells this story of migration and just the work that migrants are fulfilling within the United States. And so when you look at the video, really talk about just, that sense of those pull and push factors, the impact of that economic support that's being sent back home, but yet also just the injustices that occur. And so there's a lot of dilemmas in this. But so anyway, just it's a good video to have some reference in terms of this striving for migrant justice. So in this, as I just have been reflecting of this over time, it's just this map is really just calling our attention that we're now in the U.S. Context of post 9/11, and so out of that, just being in since 9/11, I mean, we really we see that we have I think recorded 11 to 12 million undocumented immigrants. You have just a lining of systems that are working with in terms of apprehension, lining of federal, state, and local coming together in terms of deportation, global migration, the economic, cultural conflicts, war, violence, political, which are the push factors. And then, of course, increased border security and investment. And so now, we've got this play between fear and anxiety, the fear of the other, xenophobia, et cetera. but then our faith calling us, to fear not, who is our neighbor, and that we're called to welcome the sojourner in our midst. And so, that the impact of being in post 9/11, and of course the expansion of detention systems, and then where we are now is just as the border, is about security, and of course, building a wall. And then you have this impact of asylum, laws, which we understand remain in Mexico policy of the MPP, and then also this aspect of safe countries that plays into that, the proclamation of safe countries that really aren't safe in terms of just where people would be able to claim asylum. And then, of course, this is information from the Pew Research Center that just, gives, what the numbers look like in terms of undocumented persons, within the United States. And so, again, you can look this information up. But we're a country that is, composed of immigrants, and so then. This other report here is that you can look up. It's very helpful. This is from the Migration Policy Institute. And so as you look through this information, and you can download this, historically we see that just in our relationships with Mexico, just the proximity of it, that, you had the labor flow, from Mexico to the U.S., which we've understood as the Bracero program, in the 40s into the 50s, in even the early 60s. I think you don't have, so you have waves of migration, in the coming together of this country. That then in 1965, I think that's where is this kind of major revision of immigration laws to where I think there becomes this emphasis on family reunification and skills. And then of course, 1986, under President Reagan, that's where 3 million undocumented persons are granted amnesty. And so there's some resetting there. The report talks about in 2000 that when President Bush came into of course, he was elected out of Texas as governor of this state, that he was really, I think in 2000 it records that there were like 5 meetings that he had with Vicente Fox, the president of Mexico at the time, and really to begin to open up conversations towards comprehensive immigration reform. But then 2001 attacks. 2001 occurs with the 9/11 attacks, and the report states, the public debates and new policy measures that followed initially conflated anti-terrorism measures with immigration control. And so as you look at this report, then it starts to talk about, just at that point, that's when you had organizational changes, which was bringing, Immigration and Naturalization Service and all of these different entities, the Border Patrol, all under one umbrella, which we understand as Department of Homeland Security. Then you had expanded enforcement powers within the U.S. itself, which the map was showing of just now, the aligning of these systems, I guess you could say, the militarization of the border itself. And then you have visa security, immigration, and border controls that start to come into play, as a result. And then the report goes on to talk about just comprehensive immigration reform debate. So then in that period, that's where out of that debate, and you've got elections that are occurring, and so you've got this kind of swinging that's happening within, the representation, between parties. And so, but out of that comes the Development, Relief, and Education for Alien Minors Act, okay, which is really now beginning to address those young people that were, that were brought to the U.S. At a young age, and really seeing them as a path forward potentially of becoming naturalized. And then out of that came the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA. And then, of course, we get now to 2016, and everything changes because under the current administration, you just essentially, and as they're calling it, or at least the phrase they're using here with the Immigration Welcome Coalition in San Antonio is death by 1,000 cuts. So we see that things are just getting stripped away. The bar for achieving asylum in terms of that case is getting higher, and of course now with the Remain in Mexico, just the tank courts, all of that infrastructure, just makes it near impossible. And then if you can go, here's another resource, the Interfaith Immigration Coalition. I was watching one of their webinars that was recorded in earlier this month, or March, around the middle part of March, and then they had another follow-up session yesterday that I wasn't able to get onto. But what this group is doing is they're really working with the issue of DACA right now. So in fact, if you're able to look at the recorded sessions of these webinars, the first one was actually all DACA young people that are actually DACA kids. And so there's a passion, and they're steeped in their advocacy around this because it's waiting for the Supreme Court ruling on this, if in terms of it staying in place. So this would be a good resource to connect with. So, and of course, from our faith perspective, Scripture calls us, to welcome, the alien or the sojourner in our midst, to welcome those, and that, to not forget to offer hospitality, and so, to be that good neighbor. And so, we're called, Scripture, we're directed by Scripture, out of our faith. So now, my reflection, I believe that we're also in this place of liminality, kind of this in between, or at this threshold. And so, what I'm setting up here is just, our congregations, we've got, I guess the human political reflections of that. And so in that, therefore, the colors, that are just noted there, and then, but yet, reflected against, just what we're called to as people, as people of faith. And so when I think about Imago Dei, the image of God, I mean, that's really, God's presence in the world. And just the image of humanity, our brother, our sister, that's the common denominator. I mean, what's interesting about this time of COVID-19, this pandemic, is that this is it does not discriminate, socioeconomic, education, class, race, ethnicity, nationality. And so we're really, this is really about, humanity. I think about shalom, as the world, God's intends, his perfect peace, or that abundance. And of course, we know that in the Hebrew scriptures, it's cited 397 times. Shalom would be, wellness, welfare, at rest, completeness, to cause, to be at peace, to make peace, peace offering, secure, safe, to finish well, to prosper, to be whole, to be perfect, victorious. So and Jeremiah tells us to seek the welfare or the well-being of the community, and in that, you shall find your welfare and your well-being. And so I lift that up as one of our tenets, of our foundational pieces. And then of course, to be that prophetic voice, there's something about, as we start to receive information and be informed by Scripture, we're responsible. We become responsible for that. And so, how are we a prophetic voice and a witness to the world in terms of, God's justice here on earth. And then the other part of it is, I think, the role of the church, that it's not, it's not beholden to borders, and it's seeing the whole of humanity. And so I think that when we look at the border, I know certainly, and I'll reference this more, but it's just, I know that the church, in terms of the body of Christ, or the Christian context, I mean, the church is universal, and that's manifested by just the connections we have. As you've gone on mission trips and gone to Africa or other parts of the world, you had an immediate connection just because of that connectedness of the church, in going there. Or as I was hearing someone said, just as you are coming from, this particular conference or judicatory area, you're going to another, you have that connectedness of the church. So we're constantly crossing boundaries and borders, and we're not beholden to that. And then the other thing, reflection here, is this, that we're stewards of complexity. What I mean by that is that particularly, when I talk about the liminality of the border, I think about that. I think about just the complexity of that, and thinking about, even congregations that in that same space, the shepherds of the flock, members of that flock may be those who are called to uphold the law, may be border patrol agents, but yet in that same space may be worshiping alongside undocumented persons, or in relationship in the community itself, of those that are migrants, that are seeking asylum, or that have been here in this country for years, but yet have no documentation. And so there's a lot of complexity in this, that I think that we're charged as being in this region of the border, of South Texas, 450 miles of border, that, how do we steward that complexity? How do we really begin to tell that story, with heart, with passion, and with conviction, that may begin to impact others in receiving that story. And then also knowing that, just in the makeup of all our different, congregations and places of faith, and again, this is reflected back to the political spectrums within the church, is that, what percentage of the whole is actually involved in this work. And so, if God calls us to all that's listed here, to embrace that is really, if you want to say politics, the kingdom politics, or his justice, justice here on earth, his will be done on earth as it is in heaven, then there really is perhaps this aspect of conversion of the body itself, to be converted, towards the fullness of justice, as we are also working for justice. So that's just a bit of setup there. I wanted to also commend to you this blog, and it's just part of a blog post, but it's written by John Fagans. He's a pastor of La Trinidad United Methodist Church here in San Antonio downtown, and so he and his wife Raquel have a website called liminaria.net, and so in this which is, I think that just talks about this gathering of thought, but in this time of coronavirus, what John is really calling out is how we're called to live in Sabbath now. We're actually called to live out Sabbath in this time of social distancing. And of course, when I read this, it just, he's indicating here that Sabbath, in other words, that day that God ordained to rest, on that last day, that seventh day, that there was no work to be done. There was nothing, so you could say theoretically that income is lost, et cetera, et cetera. But it's also this time of resetting. And so we are called back to this time of Sabbath. I think we're starting to see play out how we're adapting into this time, and while we're distanced from each other, but yet our connectivity may be increasing, just through these online interactions. But again, this really calls for this reset. So I add Sabbath to this because I think, again, there's some reflections that we can put in our reflection box or toolbox that may help us in this work to keep us grounded, but also to help us in the articulation of our convictions of this, as we work towards foundations for migrant justice. So with this, I just, now going to do a little panorama here. And this is part of, just our work, my work with the Rio Texas Conference. I'm in one of these hovering roles. And so, part of this is I guess maybe, the ability or the opportunity to convene people. And so what we did last September in San Antonio is we had this border convocation, this convocatoria fronteriza there in San Antonio. And so it brought together about 115 people. Most of them were United Methodists, some coming from various conferences within Texas primarily, but then the majority were Rio Texas Conference folk. There were about 12 people from the Methodist Church of Mexico and across the border. And so I regard this as it was a bilingual, binational event of just telling the story of what's happening along each points of the border. We actually did this in 2018. We had about 25 people then, and that was right after at the point where you had children separated from their families, and then this year it just got bigger, as we're realizing that each point of the border had some sort of very defined, undeniable response. And so you can just see here that they were just receiving the presentations. We provided translation, for those who needed it throughout. And so this map, what this shows is just that, as I mentioned, every point of the border has some sort of response, and it just became increasingly clear, particularly throughout 2019. In our context of the Rio Texas Conference, when you think of the border or you hear the border, you tend to be thinking of this area down in Brownsville, McAllen, as we call the lower Rio Grande Valley. We know that, and of course, back in 2014, when you had this influx of unaccompanied minors, I mean, a lot of the kids were passing through the respite center, and of course, we all are familiar with Sister Norma down there in the lower Rio Grande Valley. But then you start to see now, manifestation of folk coming through Laredo. And in 2014, I think, 2017, at that point, that's where you had a lot of Cubans, a lot of Cubanos that were stuck in Nuevo Laredo, because in January of that year, that's whenever they changed the policy from wet foot to dry foot, or dry foot, wet foot policy. They took it away, and so folk were stuck there. And then I think I want to say back in November of 2018, you had people that were just waiting on the bridges, and so we know that over time what was happening is this whole waiting at the bridge, was when metering was starting to occur, and of course that's happening in Piedras Negras. We had one of our churches and our ministries was going across and bringing food and clothing and blankets and things like that to the folk in Piedras Negras, waiting on the border and working with the Methodist Church of Mexico there. And then next thing you know, folks are able to get across. And then another manifestation was in Del Rio, where I'll show something on that here shortly. In San Antonio, of course, you had dating back now 5 years, about 5 years, the Interfaith Welcome Coalition, that its primary work is to offer hospitality at the bus station. And of course, this was more of a system of just in relationship to the detention centers, and knowing how many people, how many families were being released when they were coming. That would then, set off how many volunteers were needed and how many backpacks and sandwiches and things like that were set up, needed to provide for the families for that day, and then orienting them on their trip. And so then, when you got to the latter part of March in 2019, y'all may remember that all of a sudden you had people that were coming, particularly from like Eagle Pass, Del Rio. They weren't necessarily coming from the lower Rio Grande Valley, and you had people coming from different countries like the Congo and different countries in Africa, Haiti, et cetera, that were, before it was more, the norm was those from Central America. And so whenever, and then you had Travis Park Methodist Church, or Travis Park Church, which was 2 blocks away from the bus station. They were starting to house people. Well, when those numbers got so big, the city of San Antonio moved into action and established the Migrant Resource Center. And so you had this new rhythm that was starting to occur between the bus station, through the Interfaith Welcome Coalition, the Migrant Resource Center, through the city of San Antonio, working with the food bank and offering some health triage, things like that, and then the migrant overnight shelter offered by Travis Park Church. And so this was a pretty fascinating thing for the city of San Antonio. Through our interfaith, through our faith-based initiatives. What San Antonio works on is to be a city of compassion, and so this is a very fascinating thing to have seen this whole thing unfold in a 2-block radius, of this connection of response. I mentioned Del Rio. That was interesting because in that picture there, you can see that it's gathering with the Border Patrol, but also a city councilman and some pastors, and there was our person from the United Methodist Committee on Relief, Jack Amick. He happened, we actually were down there. He was in the area, and we took him on a border tour. But he's with Global Migration, and so what this meeting was about was led by the Wesley nurse, parish nurse, was really realizing that migrants were now, there in Del Rio, which was a new manifestation. They were hanging around at the Stripes station, and so there was a response and a concern, that number one, their vulnerabilities. So it's, how could we make sure things were safe for them, but also just the community itself, so that there would not be anything that would just play into any kind of negative perceptions in terms of migration or migrants, and people coming across. And so what surfaced was this Verde Border Humanitarian Coalition, and it just, and it manifested very quickly, and it reflected, I think, that complexity I spoke of just bringing all these folks together, not in a political sense, but just simply in a humanitarian response sense. In Eagle Pass, you had now this manifestation as their numbers went up. Their other campus, because there are 2 churches that came together, and so worshiping in one place, but now with the other church being essentially a migrant resource center, another resource center. Now in Eagle Pass, then what was manifesting is a sheltering partnership with the Lutherans and the Catholics. They're in Eagle Pass, and of course their relationships with Border Patrol. And so what we find is that these ministries become really partners with Border Patrol, because they're taking folk there directly, or if you get to places like the Holding Institute in Laredo, they're a shelter where folk that are brought to them are really kind of the least desirable, and so they receive them. And so in this photo is just at that high point where they were, receiving folk and sheltering them there at the Holding Institute. And then, of course, we're familiar with down in the lower Rio Grande Valley, which that is just now a coalition of the Humanitarian Respite Center, Good Neighbor Settlement House in Brownsville. There's also that welcoming aspect at the bus station, and then La Posada Providencia San Benito. That would be more of long-term settlement for refugees, much like Casa Marianela in Austin and other places in the country. And then we heard in this convocation from the ministries on the other side, Ministerio de Inmigrantes. This is in Piedras Negras, and so the story we get there from the Methodist Church of Mexico, and I put it in this context, is that Methodist Church of Mexico really has been more of ministry in the street, of feeding people in the street and supporting them in that way. They stay clear of creating any kind of shelter situations for within their churches, simply because they just to stay clear of cartel activities and those kind of things. Now, there are shelters. I think some of that work is, there's challenges to it. I mean, there was a story of in one shelter that I think cartel. You have people that are watching, they're vigilant, and they went in and brandishing a gun, and well, they backed off once they realized it was just the work of the church that was happening there. So in this, you can see that they're feeding people in the street. This is in Matamoros, and so now you can see the manifestation of the tent cities. I think as we were hearing these reports, I became aware just in the reports that there's not uniformity at any point of the border. So even when you had the manifestation and the implementation of the migrant protection protocol or the Remain in Mexico policy, it started in Tijuana, then I guess it came across to El Paso, then it started happening down in Matamoros, but then the latter part, it was manifesting later, in Del Rio and Eagle Pass. Or you'd hear stories of how there was an accumulation of people down in the lower Rio Grande Valley. Border Patrol would fly them up to Eagle Pass or Del Rio area. So you see here the manifestation of the tent cities down in Matamoros, which y'all been there. Probably as you started Courts and Ports. I went on the abbreviated version of Courts and Ports, so I didn't do the court part. But when I went there in August, I mean, these tents were starting to show up. So if y'all go further back in history, you probably are going down there where you weren't. Maybe the tents weren't there yet. Then we're also hearing from Fernanda. She's from Monterrey, and so she was talking about just how they're responding to migrants there in Monterrey. And of course, I showed this earlier. So the Interfaith Welcome Coalition, just by the numbers in 2019, they gave away 25,000 backpacks between the bus station and the airport, and then through the Migrant Resource Center, they you can see the numbers on medical assessments that were given, and 83,000 meals plus that came through the food bank and other entities to provided as the folk were coming through, and this was all within probably a 6-month period, and then within an 8-month period, Travis Park Church slept over 22,000 people in that period of time. And in this convocation, we also had stories from in our particular case, the United Methodist Ministry for immigration would be Justice for Our Neighbors, and so we had a panel of lawyers that were talking about just the challenges that they were having as they were working with cases, people in detention, filing, and arguing for asylum, seeing the bar get higher and higher. Rich is down in the valley along with Natalie in Harlingen. This guy Anacletus is in Corpus Christi, and Smiranda is going to the detention centers in Dilley and Carnes and Pearsall. But even how, as all these the policies are changing, they they still may be doing well, actually not now, but probably up until they were closing the border, they were going through this work of taking Spanish translated documents, of legal documents, to garner that information from the asylum seekers, getting them to the court, and translating back into English and filing them. And so it just speaks of this understanding of the law that is still intact, but yet in conflict with the policy, the active policy.
I should listen to. Maybe he'll get to the present eventually. I'm not happy.
And then we heard from our bishop, and I just offered to you this Ministry Matters. He's got some pieces in here that really just talk about border crossing, and so in that I think that that becomes beneficial to just telling the story of what's happening. Some of you have probably met Cindy Johnson. So in this, these are some of the posts of videos that Cindy is.
I need a small Coke full of ice.
Oh, okay. What else for you?
That's all.
Be able just to.
Yeah.
For a minute.
I'm trying to.
Whoever's on the 210 phone call, please mute yourself.
I think I got it. Possibly. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So, and so what I offer here is these are some posts that Cindy Johnson has on her Facebook. Some of you may be friends with her, maybe you're already seeing these, but these are really helpful, because I think Cindy is going across to Matamoros weekly, and I think primarily on Tuesdays. She may be going more than that. Cindy reflects someone who's connected with Team Brownsville and the work of Mike Seifert, and different groups, Angry Tias and Abuelas, and now of late I forgot the name of the group, but they're offering the medical component there that is now been set up. And so when you look at the videos and you go to Cindy's post, I mean, you can see how the manifestations, the evolution that is occurring within the migrant camp, the tent city there in Matamoros, and so it's a pretty fascinating thing. I think in this last video, she's talking about now how a pharmacy is being set up. And so she actually shared on another call, she actually has permission to continue to go across. And so, of course, through Cindy's connectedness, she's as she reports out, she's a point of contact, as people are sending medications, and what she's basically doing is identifying the needs as spoken by the people and the community, as the community itself gets organized, and then is able to speak that out to us here on the United States, soliciting response, and the responses are occurring. So out of that, and what I'm doing is I just took you through that panorama, as we've experienced it. But out of it, at the time of the convocation, I essentially just projected, kind of a walk by faith, not by sight thing, of just setting up these monthly webinars. And so we had, about 3 webinars, October, November, December. And then once we got to mid-December, what was born was just out of conversation with Texas Impact, the Interfaith Welcome Coalition, and inviting other folks, ecumenically, Lutheran, Catholic, Baptist, and Presbyterian, to come together, that then was looking at, establishing a network that could really begin to tie groups together. I won't go through all this, but then in November, I was able to go to El Salvador and connect with an immersion, that really just had some day trips that took us through to kind of hear the story of what's happening. This La Partida video would be real helpful because it talks about just kind of what has been common in terms of just the harassment of folk by the gangs, families, and then it causes forced migration into the city and eventually migration out of the country. And so that's a good reference piece. And of course, in El Salvador, there's that ingrained and deep history of Oscar Romero. And of course, this is a photo of just those who have been, disappeared during the Civil War. And of course, some community-based projects that we were able to see, which I found this, one of my questions that I ask is the coexistence, and this would apply to Matamoros, this would apply to this work of response in the midst of, the negative elements such as cartels. Is there a coexistence there? Where is that place? What does that look like? An example would be, I think there was a report down in Matamoros that you had, folk from the U.S., our understanding of human rights, et cetera, you actually, was concerned for a particular young lady, I guess, that they knew. They got her out of the line and accompanied her and walked her across, and demanded that she be able to get across. They were offering that accompaniment. Well, she was able to get across, but I think the next day they sent her back. And so the story is that that essentially that disrupted or that upset the cartels who were watching this. And so what I came to kind of understand out of that is that the people that are in line, as we've understood the metering, were actually paying to be in line. Well, that is income that the cartels are receiving. And so then I began to wonder, well, I guess it's okay to feed and offer water and whatever to the customers for their customers, but just don't mess with their customers in terms of taking them out of the line. So I just offer that as a reflection in terms of just this coexistence. What does that look like? This was stamped on the walls in Xochitoto, which is basically saying, you see this not on every house, but several houses, and it says in English, and in this house, we want a life free of violence towards women. And so I think that says something about, in this case in El Salvador, the machista, the macho culture, and just all those things that are happening, that really kind of, support, just the gang life and those kind of things, but just how the people are just, wanting to be freed from all that. This is, for us as United Methodist, Rio, Texas, we have what we have established called the Methodist Border Friendship Commission. Now, again, this may be the same, something similar that the Presbyterians I know have a similar network. The Baptists have a similar network. Maybe the Lutherans, and of course the Catholic, and this would reflect then that binational relationship of the church on the border. And so in this case, this is the Methodist Border Friendship Commission that is about 25 years old. You can see this is in Nuevo Laredo. So those from the U.S. side actually met in Laredo. The people from Nuevo Laredo came and picked us up. We went across. And so here they're discussing just, some funding and how to support some projects, particularly on the Mexican side of the border. Mike Smith of the Holding Institute, actually, this is a Cuban couple that Justice for Our Neighbors went across for that day just to talk to these folks about their situation. They're in a holding pattern. They're in Nuevo Laredo seeking asylum. And then, of course, when we begin to look at this regionally, again, there may be some similarities in terms of how all of our churches are, say, working ecumenically within the regions, okay, along the border, through Mexico, and throughout Latin America. And in this case, again, this would be more the big picture for the United Methodist Church. And so that brings us to now, what is this all manifesting towards? And so that brings us to the Texas Border Collaboration Network. I mentioned that earlier when we had the United Methodist, the Rio Texas Conference Border Convocation. I started those webinars, and then now it's manifesting to this group here. So this is a new group. It's now finally settled on the name. There's a Facebook link that you can connect to, and we invite you to friend it, to connect to it. But also, I think that there's opportunity to, as I think I was hearing in Dallas, if Dallas is now organizing around, just responses, it would be beneficial to. We would love that connection to the Texas Border Collaboration Network. So the scope of this essentially is from El Paso, Juarez, down to Brownsville, Matamoros. And so we're still working on developing the structure. This isn't something bureaucratic. It's just an attempt to create connection. And so the proposed structure here is to really identify liaisons at each point of those borders. How do we kind of this is all towards the support of asylum seekers and refugees in these areas of direct service, legal support, hospitality, and advocacy. Okay, and so those are the 4 areas of development that we're striving for. And so in that, we would still be working to have these monthly webinars, and you can see here that then along that, these 4 areas, we'll be working towards the coordination of these 4 areas of direct service, hospitality, connections, legal support, and advocacy along each of these points of the border. And of course, this is just how the migrant route, following the train in Mexico. But you can see there's a list of just all these points along there. So okay, I don't know what happened here. So we'll be having a webinar on April the 21st. You can find that information on the Facebook page. We'll actually be hearing from Hope Border Institute, which is really giving coverage to the El Paso, Juarez, and Las Cruces area. So we'll be hearing about their work and their responses, and particularly in light of COVID-19. So to finish this up here, and I think, when we talk about building a foundation of migrant justice, and I think, as I was experiencing the advocacy days, I think there are about 25 people in the room, probably all of you were part of, or that were there, been part of Texas Impact. And as my understanding, I think from Erica, that since the inception of Texas Impact, you've probably had about 400 people, experience Texas Impact. And then I think there was in the introductions, there was some, expression of just what's happened since then. So what this is just really helping us to visualize is this starting point of going to the border to see and to listen, that then takes us to this place of discernment, which we're reflecting. So this is generative. Reflecting, interpreting, educating, organizing, and mobilizing, that then leads us to act, our advocacy. In this case, federally, at the state level and the local level. And then to repeat that cycle. And so thinking in terms of just now, as we're striving to coalesce, all of this around those areas along the border in terms of the responses, how does our advocacy start to really manifest, I guess, in a coalesced way? It's a lot of work, but and so in that, actually, Be Morehead will actually be working with us, or on behalf of Texas Impact. Texas Impact is a partner with this network. They would be actually helping with the advocacy part of it. So we regard you all actually to be partners in this work. So I'll stop. That's pretty much it. I guess just now we can open this up for as you have questions, but also just conversation what have you seen? What are you discerning? And what actions might you be taking at this time?
Yeah, so thank you so much, Abel, and thank you everybody for hopping on. Like Abel said, this is a time of conversation. We have about 7 minutes until 2 o'clock, but we're able to stay on for longer than that if we need to. There have been no questions in the chat, so go ahead and start talking about how can we lift each other up? How can we connect and improve our advocacy alongside one another?
So what is your sense of kind of next steps of where you are? I think I had heard something at the earlier in terms of like what's happening up in the Dallas area.
Can you say something about the impact of the coronavirus on the camps in Mexico? Are they practicing in any way social distancing? Can they?
No, I think that's a challenge. Global response management is the group I think that's kind of the lead. So I know that there are some doctors, there's some medical folk that are there, but that's something I would have to maybe catch up with Cindy on conversation. But I know that my sense is that there's tremendous challenge in that. There's tremendous challenge in that. I think also, I don't think in Mexico that they've been necessarily practicing social distancing. So I think there's maybe the general population, but then also that of the camp itself.
This is Karen DeStefano. When will your next convocation be for your meetings?
The next will be April 21st will be the webinar, and that's where we hear from Hope Border Institute out of the El Paso area. Now the hope is that so if you'll put on, and you'll get these slides to remind you that, but essentially if you'll put on your calendars the third Tuesday of the month at 10:45 a.m. Central, and we're actually using the same Zoom link, and so as this network continues to build, I think it may have a kind of a flux between online conversation and updates in terms of what's happening at the border. And so I would imagine even by, this next session, we probably can have more definition in terms of what, the impacts of COVID-19 at the border, or specific presenters, from their specific work. And so again, there'd be we envision plenty to share over time around the areas of direct services, legal support, advocacy, and hospitality connections. So April 21st would be the next session online. Yeah. I hope y'all would join.
I plan to.
Oklahoma. You're up in Oklahoma, Karen. Is that correct?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great.
Yeah, representing the jurisdiction too.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Do you have any work that you're doing with legislators at this point?
No, no, I, not me directly. I mean, there are, those who are, like working with Texas Impact here with the Interfaith Welcome Coalition. I mean, a lot of their work has shifted to advocacy because the direct service has slowed down, tangibly here in San Antonio, and as they tried to shift some of the support in Laredo, so it's trying to shift a lot of the involvement of folk to advocacy. So in terms of just framing the issues and connecting to legislators.
I wonder if there can be some mechanism by which we share our experiences dealing with legislators and collect our impressions as to where the movement is, who it is that's most susceptible to an open mind or to changing opinion.
Yeah, well, and I think that's a good point, because I think then the framework I was describing in terms of what this the Texas Border Collaboration Network is ascribing to, that piece of advocacy would be exactly what you're asking. Would be, could you maintain some online check-ins? One would be to get, just kind of be up on what are the pressing issues, and what would be the strategies, the tactics, or just, the work in that, so the call to actions, if you will. So I don't know, Eric. I mean, I think this is, everyone here, I think, are Courts and Ports alumni, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. And so how would you be mobilized, I guess, and so I would think the next step would be maybe, now I know you're having these webinars quarterly, but it doesn't prohibit any just coming together somehow. I'd be happy to facilitate that, as via Zoom. So.
Yeah, and we're definitely looking for more ways to connect, and we have to kind of postpone some of the ideas that we had because of social distancing and shelter-in-place orders during this COVID quarantine, but we are always trying to keep you connected and trying to keep you up to date. For example, last week we sent out the emails about the COVID stimulus package that was going in front of the Senate, and wanting to have you guys call the senators Cornyn and Cruz to make sure that we include language for migrants in that bill. And we got a lot of responses from that.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, a lot of those responses were Cruz's voicemail was full, so we couldn't leave a voicemail with him. And Cornyn, we left a voicemail, but then didn't hear back. So that kind of gets to Whit's point about it's good to know that some of those offices aren't necessarily going to be receptive to what we have to say, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be reaching out to them anyway.
Yeah, well, and also what just comes to mind, I think that it's that, are we in this period of connectedness, is that increase? So through that, let's harness that online, but then also just as you begin to, I wrote out here, to discern, it's just out of your own expressions, you're writing, as those things are shared, posted and that sort of thing. So I think that's part of the knitting together the fabric of this complexity that we hold. We're here. The stories, the people, and you've been to the border, and we have people, that continue in this work. And so I think it's all in our midst. How do we begin to get organized around it?
Mm-hmm. Just to give you guys a heads up, there was a little bit of a text conversation in the chat. that happened where someone asked which organization is most in need of donations. And Mike Seifert replied saying that Cindy Johnson would probably have the best counsel in that regard.
Yeah. Oh, and I see Cindy, you're on here. Hey, Cindy.
Yeah. And so part of the problem that we're having is that we can't get food over to the
Right.
asylum camp very easily because we can't buy in bulk, and we also can't carry large quantities of food across the border. And so that's, I think, been a problem for the last few months now. But we're continuously trying to aid Cindy Johnson, Team Bronzeville, the Angry Tias, and Abuelas to make sure that they have all the tools at their disposal to help the asylum camp. And I don't know if Cindy or Mike Seifert would like to jump in and maybe just say a few words in that. But we do want to say thank you to both of them for their continued work in the Rio Grande Valley.
Hi, this is Mike. Thanks for this, Abel, and that great group for participating. I think that things are just in such a crazy time, as we all know. I would certainly encourage everybody, you do this all the time anyway, but pay very careful attention to what your cities are doing with regard to undocumented people, as well as asylum seekers who are documented, but subject to the whims of the government, who some of them are using the epidemic as an excuse to really crack down on immigrants. The latest thing, I'll stop with this because there's so much, but the latest thing that the Border Patrol is doing is they're operating under a thing called expulsion. So if they pick up anybody who crosses the river, or if they present at the bridge, whether they're asking for asylum, whether they're trying to slip into the United States, they're fingerprinted and then they're immediately either placed back into Mexico or sent back to their home countries without any process, with no documentation. And so that's an alarming thing that's been run out for about a week now. We've heard horrible stories of what's going on with people. So just encouraging to keep your eyes open close by and not be afraid, of course, to speak up wisely and longly to the elected officials. They're the ones that are responsible for it. Thank you.
This is Cindy Johnson. And the other thing that is very important is DACA. It might come up with the Supreme Court. We're trying to hold that off. I have talked, there's a National Rapid Response that we've been working with. You're welcome to join them with Church and Society. That's kind of keeping a tab on all the different laws that are coming on and programs. So that's a really important one because they're the ones that are really running on your grocery stores and everything around. So that's something that might come up, and we're writing our people to tell them to please be humane when that happens. So there's a lot of places we could connect to look into policies. I just wanted to bring up there's a lot of policies that are happening without us knowing, and we got to keep an eye out for them.
Alrighty, well, does anybody have any last questions or comments that they'd like to share?
Thank y'all for this time and this opportunity. As it was mentioned, this was recorded, so I'll get the link to you, Erica, and then you'll also have these slides, that has all that information as reference for you.
Yeah, so once we get that video, I will take the slides and the video and put them up on our website and send that out to everybody so that you have that. There were a lot of good links in there. I'd suggest you go to those reports and those videos. Thank you so much, Abel, for doing that presentation for us. And then thank you so much, everybody, for logging on and joining us for this first webinar. We hope to continue connecting you with others and with our partners who are doing and working towards migration justice. And thank you for the work that you've done and for going on Courts and Ports and for being lifelong advocates.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. Have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thank
All
you.
right. God bless.